Ben, écoutez, c'est clair que c'est pas n'importe qui peut s'avérer des ressources pour venir au Canada pour étudier. Ça ne veut pas dire pour autant que ces gens-là ne sont pas intelligents, qui ne participeraient pas nécessairement à l'épanouissement intellectuel de notre pays. Évidemment, de travailler au Canada, de devenir peut-être des résidents permanents et des citoyens. Mais c'est clair que le niveau de la vie, puis le seuil qu'on imposait de 10 000 $ date d'une vingtaine d'années. Il faut bien que les gens qui veulent venir au Canada sachent ce à quoi s'attendre, et surtout dans une atmosphère d'abordabilité et les défis que ça présente, que ça soit le coût de la vie généralement ou le prix du loyer. C'est clair que les gens qui postulent au Canada doivent savoir ce à quoi s'attendre et doivent démontrer les capacités financières de pouvoir s'établir ici. Alors, il y a un équilibre à atteindre. C'est la raison pour laquelle on va regarder des projets pilotes pour s'assurer que certains pays défavorisés, certains lieux défavorisés, certains étudiants qui auraient de plein droit ou la capacité de s'épanouir au Canada puissent le faire. Mais c'est clair que dans le contexte, il fallait absolument agir pour s'assurer que ce seuil de 10 000 $, qui était bien en delà du seuil de nos compétiteurs et des pays auxquels on fait de la compétition, qu'on soit à ce niveau. Donc, c'était quelque chose qui était attendu depuis longtemps. Et puis, espérons, et je pense que ça va contribuer de surcroît avec les mesures qu'on a mises en place à date et ceux que les provinces mettront en place, va continuer d'enrayer la fraude qui sévit à travers le système. Vous avez parlé de la responsabilité des provinces. Il y a un défi de juridiction dans tout ça. Mais sachez que du côté financier, le Canada, à court terme, n'obtient aucun bénéfice. Ce sont les provinces qui prennent une mesure des frais et ce sont les institutions qui sont désignées par les provinces qui prennent la majorité des frais. Il y a de l'abus, c'est l'abus qui doit être enrayé et c'est surtout de la responsabilité des provinces de le faire.
Minister, you referred to the universities not liking the bluntness of some of the instruments that you might use. What did you mean by that, and what do you expect universities to do?
Well, so Rafi, I mentioned institutions themselves, and they have a very large portion of the responsibility in making sure that the student experience is properly reflected in the resources that they're given, whether it's providing housing, whether it's providing proper health supports and a proper academic experience. There is a responsibility on behalf of the provinces that designate the learning institutions in question to make sure that those are actually the institutions that are worthy of getting visas from the government of Canada. There are, in provinces, the diploma equivalent of puppy mills that are just churning out diplomas. And this is not a legitimate student experience. There is fraud and abuse, and it needs to end. There have been, when you take, for example, the province of Ontario, there have been Auditor General reports that have recommended some very important measures that have not been put into place, and that has contributed to the abuse. So the bluntness of the instruments that we have at the federal government level, in addition to the fraud task forces, is the strict removal of visas, which can have a number of effects and can have ripple effects, whether we designate a particular institution in particular or whether we simply take other measures to significantly reduce this. The federal government can't do it alone because our measures and the measures that we have, the policies that we have, can have ripple effects on what the portrait of an international student experience could look like, and we could potentially miss the mark. Provinces have a number of tools at their disposal, namely the regulation of the designated learning institutions that, in some cases, just need to be shut down.
Have you taken a look at what impact that extension could have on permanent residents in Canada who are competing for those same jobs with the students?
Are you talking about the work hours?
Yeah.
Well, look, there's labor shortages across the country. The measure that was put into place during COVID was one that was designated to make sure that those shortages were being addressed. It was popular. We had heard legitimately from students that a 20-hour work week is doable and is something that people could actually study at the same time and work 20 hours. Also, employers were looking for people that could potentially commit for over 20 hours. and perhaps only work 20. So it was limiting the availability for students out there. It is costly to be a student in Canada. So having that flexibility and dealing with those two competing public policies, I think, was one of the challenges that we're still juggling with. We know that over 80% of international students are factually working over 20 hours, but 40 hours is just untenable. It is not credible that someone, except for rare occasions, could work a full work week and actually study at the same time. I know, having done it myself, and I know lots of people that have worked very hard, but those 40-hour work weeks drain you, and it is not reflective of a proper student experience. But there is flexibility, and we were looking at an hour category in and around 30 hours, but it hasn't been decided yet. So given the financial pressures that current students in Canada would be feeling had we taken a decision to roll it back to 20 hours, it didn't make sense, and would probably perhaps put more strain on students that are currently struggling to make ends meet. I don't think students are taking jobs away from other people, given the labor shortages that are happening in Canada. My focus primarily is to make sure that the public policy that we have in place is one that reflects the ability of the student to actually do what they're supposed to be doing, which is study, without bankrupting themselves. So there's a middle ground there that we need to look at. I'm going to look at more data with my team to make sure that something like 30 hours actually makes sense. But currently, with the data that we know, rolling it back to 20 hours would have been on the draconian end of the spectrum.
Minister, a related question to your file.
This will mean that there will be fewer international students coming in because you've raised the financial requirements for people to come to Canada. Do you have any models or numbers on that?
We're currently looking at that, Mackenzie. It is what it is. The reality is that we need an international student program that is robust. Clearly, we compete with other countries for some of the top talent, but clearly we have become a country that has been targeted for abuse and exploitations by some unsavory actors, and we need to be able to address that head on, and I think provinces need to be able to address that head on. And these measures are intended to shore up the integrity of the system. For now, I'm not worried about the absolute number. What I'm worried about is the students, and to make sure that they have the proper student experience and that they are indeed studying, and that the unscrupulous institutions that exist today that aren't actually learning institutions, but are a conduit for money going to some people that want to profit off them, and potentially some backdoor entries to Canada, are effectively shut down.
On another topic, the Americans are considering imposing visa bans on extremist Israeli settlers. There's calls for the EU to do that. Is Canada considering something similar?
Look, people that commit crimes aren't welcome in Canada, and the differences that we have in how we deal with specific situations that are occurring around the world, and the policy tools that we have in Canada vis-a-vis the ones that the U.S. use are slightly different. We don't want people that have committed crimes, particularly crimes of this egregious nature, given the geopolitical context, make their way into Canada. Canada has typically adopted a case-by-case basis, but it's information that we are working with the U.S. on. We aren't always lockstep on our approach with the U.S., but in this case, I think we could agree that people that commit crimes of this nature should not be welcome in Canada.
Minister, new data shows that Canada's, on average, is deporting 39 undocumented migrants or people a day. That's up from 2 years ago. What is your government's strategy? You had a promise to provide undocumented workers status in Canada. Where is that plan?
The promise remains. I have told, I've been quite public in saying that this is something that I will be bringing to Cabinet in the spring. It will not address all the challenges of people that are here on an irregular basis and undocumented. There's a large group of people in Canada that are Canadian by any other name that just don't have the documentation that we need to address in a mature fashion. There is resistance within the system. I would not say to you that there is unanimity in Parliament as to how to approach. There's a number of competing policies that we have to be quite, I think, wide-eyed about in how we approach this, notably in the context of the winds that have turned against immigration, and the sense that these folks, and I resist that characterization, but I don't resist the fact that it exists,